Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Alexander. I'm a librarian at the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and I'm very excited to be co-hosting this Adirondack Mountain Club program on Zoom. And the name of the program is The Big Mess, Climate Change with Al Hicks. We are recording tonight. We're recording the speaker, and the recording of the program will be available once it's uploaded to the library's YouTube channel. And I will send an email to everyone who is registered, giving you the link to the recording if you want to go back and revisit it. You're welcome to put your questions in chat. We'll probably take them at the end. And if you address your questions to everyone, not just the hosts and panelists, everybody will be able to see your questions. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Ann Pallano, who is the program chair for the Adirondack Mountain Club, and she will do some announcements and introduce our speaker. I'm turning it over to you, Ann.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Ann Pallano. I'm the program coordinator for the Glens Falls Saratoga chapter of ADK, and thanks for joining us tonight for our first program of 2022. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ADK, but if not, I'd like to encourage you to check out our chapter website at adk-gfs.org or our club website at adk.org for more information on club activities. Couple of announcements. Our next chapter event is a screening of the Banff Mountain Film Festival World Tour, which is an awesome lineup of short movies celebrating mountain culture. This is going to be held 2 weekends from now on February 5th and 6th at the Charles R. Wood Theatre in Glens Falls with different movies each day. Tickets are still available for the Saturday evening show and the Sunday matinee. Proof of vaccination and face masks are required. Festival also can be viewed online, again, a different lineup of movies. You can go to our chapter website for a link to details. Our March program will be on March 16th and is entitled Take a Walk on the Wild Side, presented by Suzanne Rancourt on identifying native flowers and plants while on hikes or walks and learning about their traditional uses as food or medicine. This is, we hope that this will be in person at Saratoga Library, but I think it's still a little bit up in the air. We'll check the chapter website and the Saratoga Springs Library website for details and links to the registration. And finally, as always, a thank you to Saratoga Springs Public Library for co-sponsoring our program, and to research librarian Chris Alexander for her expertise in setting this program up remotely. And now on to tonight's program. I am delighted to introduce Mr. Alan Hicks, retired New York State DEC mammal specialist with a subspecialty in bats and moose. Al has had his own consulting business and also serves as a volunteer for the Citizens Climate Lobby. And he's here tonight to share his knowledge on the current state of climate change and what we can do to help. So now I'm going to hand it over to you, Al.
Well, thank you, Ann, and thank you, Chris. If we can, Chris, if you can get this show started here, we can.
You're ready to go whenever you want.
All right. Okay, there we go. So the talk originally was to be a update on the bat situation, and when we got to looking at the bat situation and all the other situations, it turned instead into a presentation about the big mess. And so we will touch on the bats, but we'll touch on a number of subjects. And if I play my cards right, we'll touch on some stuff that you wouldn't expect to see in a slideshow about, certainly about bats. So, but we'll start with the bats. In 1967, the Endangered Species Act was promulgated, and there was a bunch of species on that list. One of them was the Indiana bat, Myotis sedalis, which at the time was known to exist in New York State, but we knew absolutely nothing about it or any of the other bat species we had. So when New York started its endangered species program in 1978, bats was one of the subjects. I was fortunate enough to be employed by them. And although I had claustrophobia, I soon became the bat person. So our job was to determine the status of the Indiana bat. And in the process of determining the status of the Indiana bat, we figured we might as well get the status of all the rest of them. Because 6 of our 9 species hibernate in caves and mines in the wintertime. They feed in the summer on insects, and they hang out. These are Indianas in this picture. Very convenient in terms of finding them in the winter if you can get into where they are, and they don't move at least for a while. And so we'd either count them individually or take photographs of things like this and count off the photographs. And that way we got the first baseline information ever on the status of bats in New York State. We had a bunch of people volunteer from all over the place, multiple states, Canada, both Quebec and Ontario would come down and help on the big trips. But it was very much a community effort. So over the course of 25 years, 30 years, probably, we surveyed 128 caves and mines across the state of New York. And in that effort, we counted about 500,000 bats. Now, literally counted them one at a time. All 6 species, based on our work, were doing fine. They were doing great. And the Indiana bat was doing very well as well. 75% of all the bats that we found were in just 5 hibernacula, 5 caves and mines across the state, mostly in the eastern portions, because that's where most of the mines are and most of the caves. Our composition in that effort, 85% of them were little brown bats. If you used to have bats in your attic, it was a good chance they were little browns. But interestingly enough, the second most common bat in terms of numbers was the federally endangered Indiana bat. So spent years just collecting data that would support efforts to delist the species, because it wasn't were all the bat species, but things were doing just peachy for us until the year 2006. And this picture encompasses basically the entire story. When the winter began, we had this is Albany facing west, so that's the Helderberg escarpment that you can see off in the distance. And near the edge of the eastern edge, or the right edge of the escarpment, was Hales Cave. And during the winter, we had a very odd thing. People in the Albany area kept reporting bats seen flying them around. And we didn't know what was going on. People would be shoveling their driveways in the middle of winter, and they'd come up with a bat. They'd take their dog for a walk in the winter time, and they'd jump into a snowbank and come out with a bat. Had one guy that was going through his wood pile and found 7 dead bats frozen in his wood pile. So something really weird was going on. We had no idea what it was, but we did know it was happening. And then things changed dramatically on March 14th of 2007. Now, up until this date, I had participated in every single winter survey of Indiana bats that had ever been conducted in New York. Almost 30 years of them at this point. Never missed a one. On this day, my boss said, geez, I really need this report. Can you stay and work on the report? Just send your crew out to do this survey. Lesson learned, never ever miss going out in the field to do a report, because it wasn't too many hours after they'd left, I got a phone call, and one of the guys at the entrance of the cave saying, Al, he says, something weird's going on here. And I said, well, what's that? And he says, there's dead bats here. And I said, a lot of them? He says, yeah, it's just a lot of them. I said, dozens? hundreds? I says, oh, no, there's thousands of dead bats here. And in fact, they were flowing down this stream out onto the open. They were flying out of the cave and landing in the snowbanks. And it was really quite a show. And during that trip, one of the members, Nancy Hayslip, who was leading it, took this picture. Now, at the time, there wasn't a great deal of experience on the crew in terms of recognizing things that were out of the ordinary. And they didn't recognize this as being, they thought it was different, but they didn't think it was wildly different. And it wasn't until several days later that one of the folks mentioned, well, what about that white stuff on the bats? And I said, well, what white stuff? He says, it's in the pictures we sent you. I sent you an email with these pictures in it. That's another thing you should do, is check your emails when you do work. So I looked at this picture and I knew instantly that we had never seen anything like this in the state of New York. And I also knew that all the people I knew that worked on bats, if they ever had anything like this, they would have mentioned it to me in the past. So this got kicked out in very short order once I realized it was there. And soon it was in baskets of basically every bat researcher in the world. And what we later discovered that this white stuff was a fungus, and it was growing on the exposed membranes of the animals, basically the nose, hence the name white nose syndrome, forearms, tail membrane, and the ears. The bat on the left is normal. The bat on the right is infected. We didn't know for quite some time that it was a fungus, Pseudogymnoascus destructans, which was new to science. And it took the pathology folks quite a while to believe us eventually when we said that, we've never seen anything like this before, and whatever this is the problem. Well, it was in fact the problem. And the problem is that this fungus grows on these membranes and penetrates into the tissues and causes a bunch of different problems physiologically. But the primary problem is that the bats burn a lot of energy trying to adjust for this fungus and to overcome the fungus. So the problem with this is that the bats go into the winter with a limited amount of fats reserves. That's their game plan. They use it sparingly through the winter and wake up in the spring. Well, it wasn't going to work because they're burning it up too fast in the winter, and they're basically running out of gas before spring arrived. So we automatically made the calls as soon as we got these pictures. And this was the very last survey of the year that we conducted. Most everybody had already done their work, and we'd done all of our sites. And we said, get back into your places and here in the Northeast and look for this white stuff. And they did. And you can see the red dots here are the places where we found the fungus outside of Hale's Cave. Hale's Cave is right in the middle of this bunch, by the way. And the green dots, I don't know is my arrow showing up on this? It may not. Okay, it is. The green dots are locations that were visited and there wasn't a fungus. So basically, by the time we knew there was a disease of any kind, and even though we didn't know what kind it was at the moment, it had already spread to the point where it's too late and there was really nothing on Earth we could do about it. So that was a 15-kilometer radius. So over the next few years, things happened in a hurry. Because 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15. And then in 2016, all of a sudden a case shows up way out in the state of Washington. Probably we don't know, but a bat that was transported in some fashion. because everybody in the country was looking for this every winter. 18, 19, and now it's just about every place that anybody has looked for bats. So what happened was the bats died in extremely high numbers. The 5.7 to 6.7 million by 2013, which is 6 years after the beginning of it. And here in New York, in nearby places, we had an 87% overall decline. It was a more severe decline in some places than others, as you will see in a moment. It varied, the disease varied in severity among sites. And in one site in particular, up in the Adirondacks, in the Mineville area, the Indiana bat, which is the species we most closely monitor, was actually increased, but every place else, overall, the numbers were in decline. With the bats, there's not yet clear evidence of a genetic resistance in most species, but it does seem that adjusting the hibernating behavior and winter roost selection is improving winter survival. We know that white nose effects vary by species. Some are more vulnerable than others. So we're going to do a little good news, bad news thing here. The good news is little browns, again, the bats that would have been in your attic had you had bats in your attic, are finally now starting to increase in numbers that are noticeable. And we're finding evidence of this from both summer transect surveys, where you drive vehicles with detectors mounted on the roof and you record bats that fly by you as you're driving, and you analyze the calls, and we can grossly monitor numbers and species composition that way. The winter surveys all suggest the little browns are going up, at least in the big sites. Summer colony research suggests that they're doing well in terms of reproduction, and numbers are improving. And hibernating behavior suggests that they're not quite as taxed as they used to be. So that's great news. It's going to take a long time for them to get back. Here are some numbers, solid numbers from the surveys of some of the bigger sites with little brown bats, and they're doing quite well. It's a good thing. On the other end of the scale, and the very bad news, we have the northern bat. This is a species that was about as common. Well, it may have been our most common bat in the summertime. Difficult to find in the winter because it gets into cracks and crevices, but if you were netting in the summer, you would find them. These guys got pounded by this fungus, and you could see it from the very beginning that you would have animals that were just absolutely covered with it. And they died in droves. And now they're so rare that the only place we can catch them is in eastern Long Island. So the densities elsewhere are so low that we can't reliably catch them. And in the caves and mines and winter surveys, if we see one, it's a big deal. And it used to be one of the most common bats we have. So they're really taking it hard. Another one is the tricolored bat, or eastern pipistrelle. Also taking it very hard, although these weren't ever terribly common in New York. They're more of a southern species. Indiana bats, the focus of all of our work, and this is, again, a typical cluster for these guys. They'll be up to 600 per square foot when they're hibernating. Initially, they did pretty darn well compared to little browns that crashed instantly. These guys held on pretty well in almost all the sites, but the numbers have been going down, not steeply, but steadily ever since, with the exception of the one site up in Mineville, which is still holding its own. Small-footed bats. We had more small-footed bats counted in the winter in New York State than the rest of the country combined. In fact, we had more in one mine than in the rest of the country. And that's because these guys are tough little buggers, and they can hibernate in talus slopes in West Virginia, in Virginia, and places like that. So they're not as rare as our winter counts would suggest, but they held up pretty darn well. We did lose some from the fungus, but not huge numbers, and they seem to be holding their own. Big browns, if you've been seeing any bats flying around your house in the last several years, it's a very good chance it's a big brown, because they're the only species we had that didn't seem to take a hit at all. And they're also a species that we found around buildings. The very good news on the white nose front was from the Virginia big-eared bat. I have no idea why they call it a big-eared bat, but I do know that they're found in Virginia and West Virginia, and that's the basis of their name. Actually, those are its ears, and when they're hibernating, they can curl right up. Anyway, there was a few thousand of these known, and we were just terrified that when white nose hit them, they would all be dead before we could do a thing. And it only took a couple of years to get from New York to West Virginia. And when it hit those sites, they went in Hellhole Cave, West Virginia, big site for them, and many other bats. My friends tell me they walked in and you could smell the dead bats and see bats laying around dead every place. And they got to where the big ears roosted, and they're sitting there like nothing is going on. So they were totally impervious to this disease. And their numbers are going up more than they've ever gone up before. Probably a lack of competition. We have 3 species of bats that don't go into caves and mines. And since caves and mines are the reservoir for the fungus, if you don't go into caves and mines, you're in pretty good shape. And we presume from that these 3 bat species are going to do okay in regards to white nose. So the fungus, bad news. Mammals generally do not develop immunities to fungal infections. That's just a general rule of thumb. Bad news, this particular fungus can persist in hibernacula absent the bats being present. And we also know that bats can quickly become infected through contact with the environment in these caves and mines with no infected bats present. That makes the disease density independent. To put this into perspective that might be a little timely for you guys, if COVID killed 87% of the people that were infected, and all you had to do to be infected would be to walk into a building that some other infected person had been in sometime in the past, that will give you some idea of the kind of challenge these bats are facing. It's been really, really tough for them. Also, bad news, there is a good chance that there are other variants of this fungus in Europe and Asia, and it is of Eurasian origin, probably came over from Asia to Europe about 30,000 years ago. Not likely to have been in a lab in Asia 30,000 years ago, but it came from there anyway. There is some good news. A bat's immune system can effectively and quickly deal with a fungal infection, but they can't do it when they're hibernating. So if they make it through the winter and get through to spring, they can recover pretty darn quickly from this. Good news also is this disease has been in Eurasia for a long time now, and they still have bats there. And these are all shots of bat. They didn't even know about this fungus until we found it in the United States, and then they went back and started looking for it on the home turf and found it in photographs from old sites, but never in high densities. The flip side of this is there are no large colonies of bats in Europe. We had a half a dozen at least that were bigger than anything in Europe. So perhaps it's keeping the populations low without them knowing it. Bad news on the final scene here. The disease has moved westward, as you saw earlier, and there is 12 species that hibernate west of the Great Plains. And most of these, unlike in the east, our bats are in high number and highly concentrated in places we can get in. Out there, out west, there are no big concentrations of bats. So they have a hard time getting the numbers. But these on the left here, the blue ones, cave-fringed, long-legged bat, they're the ones that they have demonstrated carry the disease. Only one species so far, Myris vellifer, the cave bat, seems to be taking it pretty hard. The good news is the Mexican free-tailed bat, the one you hear about from Carlsbad Caverns and from the caves in Texas, they seem to be doing fine with it, as is the gray bat from the southeast, which is a common species. Okay, so mixed message on the status of the bats, but they serve as an example of an extension of the Columbian Exchange, and that is the movement of people from one continent to the other and moving things with them when they do it. And as a result of that, that's almost where all of our invasive species come from, and certainly this fungus would qualify as an invasive species. To give you an idea of the challenge of the movement of species, this is a shot from 2000, and I got to move my picture here if I can. Oh, I can't. Well, 2000 and something of a moment in the time with all of the commercial airlines shown as little white streaks. So at any one time, there's just a ton of airplanes moving people and things all around the world. So the rate of this movement, the rate of the movement of invasive species is certainly accelerating. So it's not just the bats. We're not going to cover these to any great extent. A question for you folks, what kind of tree is this? I won't be able to figure out who's answered or answered correctly. But the number of times I've showed this slide, I've only had one person answer it correctly, and she was from down south. So these here are American chestnut. That was brought, a fungus was brought over from Europe to the area of the Bronx Zoo. And it was brought over in a Chinese chestnut tree, and it spread and basically wiped out what was a major component of the forests of certain parts of the eastern United States. Certainly we had them in large numbers in New York. I don't know if they were this big or not. We have other diseases that are moving around. The Cytrid fungus is affecting basically all kinds of amphibians, mostly frogs. Here in New York, the one species that's obviously getting hit is the hellbender, the second largest salamander in the world. It's found in the Allegheny and Susquehanna drainage. And they're in pretty rough shape here in New York. We've had a lot of frog species. All of the dart frogs, or almost all of them, from Central and South America, and frogs all over the world have taken a really hard hit from this, and we've lost. These are some of the species that are now extinct. It's a short, just one picture, but there's a lot more than this shot that have become extinct from this. We in New York are blessed with 19 different species of salamanders, and some of them are drop dead gorgeous, as you can see in these shots. And right now there is a disease brought through the pet trade from China to Europe, and it is killing, basically, I think it's every individual that's been exposed to it. So we better hope that this does not get to New York, because our salamanders will be in really big trouble if it does. What can you do to help on these? Well, it's a tough one. It only takes a bucket full of water to bring an invasive species into an aquatic system. It only takes a handful of individuals to bring a terrestrial problem to the fore. But certainly an awareness of the potential for a problem, not transporting foreign species into our country would be a really nice thing in terms of minimizing the chance of this. And just being on the lookout for these problems. It's almost always too late by the time you see it, but it still pays. Now, we had a bunch of different problems that constitute the big mess. One of them was the invasive species. And there's not much we can do here. But the really biggest mess, in my mind, is one that we can do something about, and we can do a great deal about. And it's called global warming or climate change. Take your pick. I first became aware of this one day when I was driving up through Lowville on my way to Watertown to survey the caves up in the Glen Park area. And I remember it very distinctly. It was a long interview, radio interview with Al Gore. And he was talking about all these things that I'm driving. I said, oh my God, I hope he's wrong. I hope he's wrong. I hope he's wrong. Because if he's not wrong, we're in trouble. We're in really trouble. Well, a lot of people said he was wrong. And everything he said, in fact, turned out to be true. You're all aware that climate change is upon us. The Arctic regions and Antarctic regions are getting hit the hardest in terms of temperature change. We're losing the ice packs in the Arctic that not only provide for the polar bears, but provide protection for narwhals and beluga whales and things of that sort from predators such as killer whales coming up into that zone. So there's a whole bunch of species that are going to be in really, really big trouble if for no other reason than the ice is melting. And it is clearly melting. Al Gore told us, and others told us, that we can expect that we will have severe drought conditions in drier regions of the country will get drier, and in some cases, wetter portions of the country will get wetter. And that has certainly been the case. There's been a long drought in the West, all sorts of portions of the West. And this particular reservoir hit a historic low on October 1st of 2021. And that has been the case for many others. Not much hydro coming out of places like this. You also get more water, more severe weather conditions of all sorts in areas that are not dry. They can be wet problems. And this is not a shot from the Amazon. This is a shot from Averill Park, just down the road from me. On the July 14th of 2021, I delivered my son to his basketball practice. And an hour later, he called me and said, come get me because the gym is flooding out. And we had 5 inches of rain in 2 hours. And this is not the high school, but this is an old school. And there was a soccer field there behind the farthest white car. But it caused a mess in a lot of the schools, a lot of the community, a lot of roads, bridges were out, things of that sort. And we have fires. Unfortunately, most unfortunately, we have some of the sequoias and redwoods that have been with us for thousands of years burned just this year. In because of the unprecedented dry conditions of the West, throughout the West. And it wasn't limited to the sequoias. I don't know of a single person that friends of mine that is out West that didn't encounter fires this year. A few years back, we were forced to evacuate from Yellowstone because of fires. Heck, this summer, looking out my window, you could see a sunset that was substantially affected by the smoke from the Western fires. So the West is on fire. U.S. weather disasters caused $145 billion in damages during 2021. And there were 20 separate billion-dollar weather and climate change disasters. So when people say, well, what's this really costing us? Here's a number you can throw at them from just last year. And not to be a Debbie Downer, but all of these things that Al Gore predicted and are coming true, most of them have feedback loops. When you lose portions of the ice in the Arctic, it exposes the water, which is darker, which absorbs more heat from the sun, which melts more of the ice, which melts and heats more from the sun, and and you warm the tundra, and you start releasing methane gas, which adds to the problem. So it isn't just the stuff that we're doing, but the consequences of what we're doing is expanding as well. Here was an interesting article this summer of one of the consequences of the droughts out west was the salmon runs on at least this river. They all died because there was not very much water, and the water that they had was too warm, and that just killed them all. So if you have, I think the salmon run 3 years. So if you have 3 years of weather like that, you'll lose all the salmon, every one of them. So, and you'll also lose species that are restricted from one reason or another to small geographic areas and with any elevational component to them all. This is a monarch butterfly, used to be common as dirt. It's a standard butterfly when I was a kid, and they all migrate south, as you all know, to portions of a small spot in Mexico and a couple small spots in the United States. And species like this are at great risk from the climate problems. One we don't think of are the oceans. 90% of the heat from global warming is absorbed by the oceans. Now, it does two things. One, it warms the water, reducing the amount of oxygen it can hold, and it also changes the pH of the water, both of which tend to reduce the productivity of the oceans in terms of plankton production and that, and thereby putting a greater stress on things like sand eels and such that eat the plankton, and then the whales that eat the sand eels, things of that sort. And also, and this was one of the comments that Gore made that really shocked me. He said that if we change the temperature of the ocean too much, these currents that move around the world and heat northern Europe and keep the California coast kind of cool and cause these upwellings of nutrients from the bottom of the ocean to feed the Grand Banks and in places like that. That's going to slow down, maybe even stop. Well, he was right. There is evidence, clear evidence now that these ocean currents, these conveyors are slowing down. And if it does, they won't be putting the nutrients up that marine species in places like the Outer Banks and Cape Horn in Africa enjoy. And we will suffer a dramatic decline in fish production. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of being on a coral reef. I did about 6 years ago and off the coast of Mexico. And it looked very much like this. I'm in about 3 feet of water with a mask and snorkel. So I've got a field of view of maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. And I'm looking down in this little patch of variety of corals in that, trying not to count the number of fish, but just the number of fish species I could see. And I couldn't do it. I was losing track of them quicker than I could do it. It's an astoundingly rich environment and absolutely stunningly beautiful. And we've lost about 20% in the last few decades, and about 50% are at risk of collapsing, are in the process of collapsing now. Reefs can't move, so if things go bad, if it's too warm where they're living, they'll die, and the species that depend on them will die as well. Some species can move, and there's evidence now that this being one, the right whale, is already relocating itself from its historic feeding grounds because of changes in the food supply. And their reproductive rate is declining, and their general health is declining. The general health of the whales is measured by mass and length and all that kind of stuff. So things aren't going particularly well for anything in the marine environments. And you talk about added problems to the climate crisis. We have one, it's called human population. This is a graph of the change in numbers in the human population. This is one that it drives me crazy when any of you that listen to WAMC, and I'm sure many of you do, every once in a while there'll be some discussion of, we have a shortage of workers. Our social security system is at risk because not enough people are putting money in. And there'll be someone that'll say, well, we need more people. We need more younger people. We have to have larger families. The one question you need to ask them is, when does it end? And they talk about numbers ending at about 10 billion or so. When you ask them why, it was, well, the system entirely collapses. So do we want to have a world where we run it right to the end, that we have so many people consuming so many resources from so many places that we just collapse like parameciums in a display case that you might have for a science project? I think we should be a little bit brighter than that, and make us think about when people suggest we need more and more people. Our population increased, which is now 7.6 billion, has doubled since 1972, which was the year I happened to graduated from high school. And that's an astounding observation, considering that it's still increasing at this kind of rate. It is very, very worrying, and something that folks have to talk about more. You folks need to talk about more. In the 70s was a remarkable time for a number of reasons. And it strikes me, this presentation is supposed to be about problems and solutions. And the solution is civic engagement. Okay, that's the only solution we have now. And it's almost like, to me, the late 60s and early 70s were the golden years of civic engagement. In largely, think I know, I haven't read this anywhere, but because of the Vietnam War. Now, this is a war that was fought. I missed it by not much. Mine was the last year where anybody was drafted, but this was the sons of people that fought the just war of World War II and went out there to do their duty, and they were drafted. Some of them wanted to go, a lot of them didn't want to go. And as they came back over the years, both alive and dead, it started to become more and more obvious that this was a mess that we shouldn't be in. And there was a level of civic engagement like we'd never seen before. And I think it's largely because of kids that didn't want to go over to Vietnam and get shot. They were protesting. The mothers and fathers of children that didn't want have shot were protesting. Dickie Hook, who was in my 7th grade class, his family moved to Canada specifically so that he and his brother Kenny wouldn't be subject to the draft when they became 18. So there was this huge outpouring by the public at our elected leaders, and one of them being our president, who chose not to run again because of that, because of the public's sentiment against the Vietnam War. And the solution to that was they did away with the draft and made it an all-volunteer army, so that not as many people would complain about their kids being killed. So, but that civic engagement, that sense of civic engagement, carried through to many other categories. Rachel Carson, her work on the DDT caused DDT to be banned. We started the EPA. January 1st, 1971 was the last televised cigarette commercial because of the public outcry about the cigarette industry and what it was doing. This guy, Derek Bryce Smith, my understanding is he was trying to get a controlled experiment he was doing some studies with lead, and he couldn't get anything to work because he couldn't get a sample that wasn't contaminated with lead. And his finding eventually led to the banning of lead in the manufacture of gasoline. So a lot of cool things were happening. And there was a thing called Earth Day on April 21st, 1970. Millions of people were out on the streets. I was one of them. Mrs. Blasey in her El Camino drove her son and a bunch of us up and down the streets in the Canandaigua area, and we would picking bottles and trash off the side of the road. And it was everybody was involved in Earth Day. It was really quite an amazing thing. So, as a result of all this public involvement in public advocacy, the people that were doing things that weren't necessarily in the public interest started to smarten up and started to devise ways to counteract the activities of the public. And the first to do so was the cigarette industry. And basically they said, out is our product, since it's the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the public. So they weren't trying to refute the facts. They were trying to create doubt in people's minds so that they would not act, so that they would not prevent them from doing what they were doing. Well, the lessons of the cigarette industry and the lead in gasoline industry and the chemical industry that made DDT, those are taken to heart by the oil industry. And when the climate change issue got big enough to pose a threat to them, they took all the lessons that they'd learned from these previous actions and put them to work to keep you from being engaged and keep you from acting when it comes to climate change. When the time comes, their goal will be for you to do nothing. It was also in August of 1972, I had the good fortune to go with my earth science teacher, his primary claim to fame was he hosted euchre tournaments or euchre games when we were supposed to be at assembly. So Craig Mills was my favorite teacher of all time. And he was an earth science teacher, and he just oozed enthusiasm. And he took several of us on this trip to the boundary waters of Minnesota. And in those 9 days, I think we had 3 or 4 days where we never saw another person. But we talked about all kinds of things, geology. And in fact, I missed my first week of college because I was on this so-called geology field trip. Best week of college I ever spent. But one of the things we talked about was this, not new to science, but new to Craig, was this idea that the continents drift around the planet and they bump into each other and they pull apart, and it was the Continental Drift and plate tectonics, those two theories, the explanation and the act and the explanation coming into play. And it was astounding. And we thought, how in the heck can a continent float across and run into another continent? And as mind-boggling as it seemed, he believed it, we believed it, okay? As outrageous as it was, it made sense because the evidence was there, and he was more than willing to follow the evidence. Nobody challenged this. Nobody was making money by us not believing that the continents were floating around on this mantle. So it was allowed to persist as an idea, unlike the whole climate efforts. And Craig, as much as he believed on this particular thing, had succumbed to this, the influence of the doubters. And he's a climate denier, and he's a good friend, and it kills me. But he believes in plate tectonics, but not in climate change. So I'm not sure what to say, other than their goal is to have you do nothing, you and I, to do nothing at all. Now, there's a bunch of people that have written about this and done things. Michael Mann is a guy that came up with a hockey stick evidence of this rapid increase in CO2 levels in the atmosphere, and he was beaten up about that. There's the movie Merchants of Doubt. If you haven't read or seen the movie, check them out. They'll give you a lot more than I'll be able to give you here. But we'll touch on a few things. One of the ways that they create doubt, that they convince people to be complacent, is they kill the messenger. Not literally kill the messenger, but they go after the person that is telling the story and not the quality of the story that they're telling. A standard for years was climate researchers, doesn't make any difference who it was, is in the field to get rich. They get all these big government contracts and that. Well, yeah, if they wanted to get rich, they'd work for the oil companies. Number of times, Joe Blow is a socialist. He's a communist. That's always a standard. I got a neighbor that has signs like that up on his house. Al Gore, of course, was supposedly claimed to have invented the internet. I kind of doubt that happened. So there was the kill the messenger kind of mentality. A lot of people are called hypocrites, okay, because they they drive a car, or they go on an airplane, or things of that sort. And I found this in the Mann book. Individuals targeted as hypocrites typically are not advocating sacrifice or asceticism, but instead articulate the case for systemic change. Okay? They're not saying that people should stop doing things. They're saying that we should pay for the things that we do. If they advocate for and are willing to abide by the taxes and regulations designed to reduce emissions, then these folks are being true to their beliefs. You might think they're wrong, but they're not hypocrites. So that's a standard line. Misinformation, or the manipulation of information, has been from the very beginning. It started with climate change doesn't exist. Then when that information was so overwhelming, they shifted to climate change does exist, but it's not man-made. Then that became overwhelming, and then it's climate change is man-made, but it's way too costly for us to invest. And then finally it's, oh yeah, climate change is a problem, but it's too late. We're doomed, so you shouldn't do anything to us anyway. Standard. We even get it in not just from the right, but we get it from the left as well. I'm involved with Citizens Climate Lobby. It's a nonpartisan group looking for common solutions that both the right and the left can agree to. We're up for anything that works, we're for, okay? And we're not against anything. But we do advocate for a carbon fee and dividend because we think it is the most effective ways to quickly address the climate problem. And basically that is put a fee on carbon that reflects its true cost to society and disperse those dividends to equally to all households with the intent of making sure that the people that have the least aren't the ones that are carrying the burden for this. It's a simple concept. You can't go into a grocery store without seeing the prices of everything. People respond to prices. And if you increase the cost of one product, they'll switch to another product. And we're hoping that we can get them to increase the cost of carbon products like gasoline and have folks switch over to electric and things of that sort. So that's the concept, very easy. Essentially, every economist in the world is supportive of it. Fee and dividend is supported by all 4 Federal Reserve chairs, multiple Nobel laureates. Shown here is Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen. So the guys that know the economy say, yeah, this is the way we should go because this will work the best. And if you have the dividend, you're not going to negatively affect poorer folks. In fact, the 60%, the lowest income folks, if you equally divided the revenues to all households, the lower 60% would get more money than they're putting in. But that doesn't really make a difference. In fact, I was at a presentation up in Glens Falls, and this woman jumped up and started hollering at us that we're working for the carbon industry. That you know, how could we even consider a fee on carbon? That's what the carbon industry wants. They want some stability in expectations for pricing. Absolutely wrong, but it didn't make any difference. She was amazing and effective in disrupting the whole show. And now there's also other people that claim that having the carbon a tax on carbon is a regressive thing, that the poor will pay more than the wealthy. And it all depends on how you do the taxes. But we certainly are very cognizant of our interest in not negatively affecting poor people, and the dividend, as we've suggested it, would lead to that conclusion. Deflection. There is oftentimes people will suggest things that are fine and they're not bad, but they take people's eye off the big prize, and the big prize is the carbon industry. So they were the first ones to suggest that you go out and pick up bottles and plastic bags and stuff from along the streets, which again is fine, but it frees them up from any obligations. Here's another quote from in one of the books about this issue. Ask your average citizen what they can do to stop global warming, and they will say, go vegetarian or turn off the lights, long before they'll talk about lobbying their elected officials. Well, our elected officials is really all we have. And that's where we need to focus our efforts. And being a vegetarian is great. Minimizing your consumption of electricity is great, but it won't amount to a hill of spit in the big picture, because if everybody isn't doing it, it won't help. Perfect example is this young lady, Greta Thunberg. She could have picked up bottles alongside the roads for her entire life, and it wouldn't have amounted to anything. But given her political activities, it's meant a great deal. I hope it's meant enough, but it's a good thing. Divide and conquer, okay? Create wedge issues or find wedge issues and stick them in there to take groups that should, by nature, be sympathetic to the conservation movement and to the climate change movement, and turn them against each other. The first time I encountered this was the very first moment that I heard the Al Gore presentation. Because when I got to my destination and met the two guys I worked with that were going to go in the cave with me, I said, did you hear this Al Gore's interview this morning? And they said, oh yeah, we heard that. And they started to laugh, and they said, he's just trying to take our guns away. I have no idea on earth how they came to that conclusion, but they believed it then and they believe it now. They are both climate deniers. The same thing is happening with the discussion of beef in that we shouldn't have cows, and that some folks are claiming that everyone should be a vegetarian, and those that aren't interested in being a vegetarian turn against the climate effort because they're trying to take my steak away. There's certainly circumstances where raising beef as opposed to other products doesn't make sense, but there's a lot of places in this country that you can grow beef that you can't grow anything else. And if you're not growing beef on it, some marmots or something will be eating the same grass. So anyway, there's also a focus on adaptation and resilience. Don't fix a problem. You go in and take care of the consequences of the problem. Fix your subways and all this kind of thing. Yes, we need to plan and prepare for climate disasters that we can't now avoid, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be fixing the problem. Again, their goal is to have you and me do nothing, or want to do nothing. A little subset of this, and almost a different story altogether, is this insane in recent tendency for people to believe things that are just off the wall lies. I had some exposure to this when I worked for DEC. I was being the mammal person, I also had the mountain lion. Okay. And mountain lion was a great species to have in New York. My friend that was a mountain lion researcher in Idaho said, well, I'm sure that you have more people see mountain lions in New York where there are none than we do in Idaho where there are lots of them. And he had spent his entire life or adult life working on mountain lions, and he'd seen one outside of radio tracking and such. So the little lie in this case was that, oh yes, we have mountain lions in New York. The Adirondacks, there's mountain lions in the Adirondacks. There have always been mountain lions in the Adirondacks. DEC is trying to hide it from us. They don't want us to know they're there. I heard this time and time again. And I remember stopping and talking to a lady at her house, and she's out in her yard. And she says, don't tell me there aren't mountain lions. He said, this DEC truck pulled right up in front of my house, right where you're parked right now, and opened up the tailgate, and 3 of them ran right out of the back, and they all had these radio collars on them. You guys have been doing this for years. Don't tell me they're not there. Well, I heard about 10 years of this, and I said, okay, that's a waste of my time. If you want to believe that there's mountain lions in New York with no tracks in the wintertime, no kills, no road kills, none having been shot since 1903 in the state of New York, none being picked up on a trail camera. If you want to believe it, go ahead. And so they did. But it's expanded in recent years. Things like Obama wasn't born in the United States. It was a good one. A little bit bigger lie was the Hillary Clinton running a child pornography ring or whatever the heck it was supposed to be in the basement of the Comet Pizza down in Virginia. A guy even went into the Pizza Hut with that pizza parlor with a gun to free these kids. And the problem was, not only was there no group trying to sell children into bondage, but there was no basement in this Pizza Hut that was supposed to be the center of this, our pizza parlor. So these lies are magnifying over time, and they're absolutely mindless, harmless until now. And now we have people that believe that the election was stolen. You're all familiar with that. You have people that believe that into you, you're going to be much better off than if you take vaccines for diseases. Believe that, oh no, these weren't Trump supporters in the January 6th riot. They're all Democrats. They were posing as Trump supporters. You can't solve problems if people are willing to believe stuff that just isn't even close to true. Doesn't make any sense at all, but they do. So I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that. I do know, and based on working on rebuilding our kitchen a couple of years ago, we had 2 great carpenters, really nice guys, that were here, and I helped them for about a week. And they had talk radio on from the moment they got here to the moment they left. And all it was the right-wing media stuff. And I said, of course this is what they believe, because this is the only thing that they're hearing. So when you have the Fox Newses and now more than just Fox News, what their listeners believe is based largely on what they say. And it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't even have to be close to true. And it also depends on what they don't say, the kind of things that they don't talk about in their news programming. And that extends, what they don't say extends even beyond that to one of my pet peeves is the weather reporting. That even with the WAMC's gentleman that always gives a climate report every day, there's never a reference to climate. There's never a discussion of this is the warmest June on record. This is, it's always, this was today's high, this was today's low. The record low was in 1926 and the record high was 1953. There's nothing to put it in the context of climate change. And by not talking about it, people tend to believe that it isn't a problem. Once again, if I haven't mentioned this before, I will now. Their goal is to have you do nothing. So, some kind of semi-positive news. We can talk about numbers here. Electric vehicle sales are going up, but they still amount to only a few percentage points of all car sales. And if we're going to break through on the petroleum consumption, it's going to have to be people buying the cars when their old car craps out. They've got to be buying electric cars. So we really have to encourage that more than we have been. Wind produces about 8.4% is all of the electric power consumption in the United States, but you can see that it's rising steadily, but it's not rising fast enough. Now, one of the negative things that people, I've even heard Donald Trump talk about how wind turbines kill birds, and it is true. Wind turbines do kill birds. They kill one hell of a lot more bats, to the point where these bats are actually attracted to the turbines. Just recent research has indicated that it's likely because they deposit scent marking locations. It's a reproductive thing, and on some part of the turbine, and other bats are attracted to it. In the process of being attracted, they're just knocked out of the sky. They are, in fact, killing bats in huge numbers at wind turbines, and to the point where it's really going to be having a population level effect if it hasn't already. The good news is that there's an easy solution for the bats, and it's a cut-in speed. Bats don't fly during the day. Bats don't fly when the wind's blowing hard. And these migrations only occur for a month or so each year. So for a very modest reduction in your overall performance, you can have a huge reduction in the numbers of bats killed. Solar accounts for only 2.3% of the power production in the United States, but you can see that is increasing very quickly, and it can't be too soon. I am a very big fan of solar panels. If our house wasn't completely shaded, I would have them. So this is a good thing. Hydro provides about 7.3% of our power in this country. Not likely to be able to gain a great deal on that, and we do have to adjust for and account for fish passages and things of that sort. The dry conditions out west has, I'm sure, greatly reduced hydro production out there. Nuclear, a great wedge issue. There's some people that absolutely hate the concept of nuclear power. I'm not one of them. We need a base supply of power for when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And nuclear has done pretty darn well, with a few bad exceptions, but there's a lot of improvements that can be done to that. And I think we need it. We're not against anything, and nuclear is one of them that we're not against in Citizens Climate. So all these messes, and there's only one solution: get involved. the people in this picture, and it always astounds me that that people are far more likely to act on behalf of the blatant and obvious lies of their masters, whoever it happens to be, than the rest of us are on behalf of our own children. It was demonstrated to me so clearly a number of years ago at a climate rally in Albany, and there's maybe 100 people there who were very quiet and soft and all that. And up the street comes an NRA parade, if you will. And there was just a ton of people, flags and banners and all this kind of stuff. They are probably outnumbered as 20 to 1. And although we're not trying to take their guns away, they think that we are. And they're people that are willing to vote. They're people willing to work campaigns. And because of that, they have a real influence on how society works. So get involved. And it can't just be write your congressman. That's important. But we need to win elections. We would not have a climate problem right now if we had 4 more senators than we currently have. If Sinema and Manchin weren't stopping things dead in their tracks, we would have huge climate legislation and social justice legislation as well. So in order to make that happen, we got to have a real working majority, and 50% plus 1 isn't a real working majority, as we've seen repeatedly. These are 4 Democrats that are at risk for the upcoming election. Send them money, offer to make phone calls for them, whatever it needs to do. I've done both for multiple candidates. It's kind of interesting. But get there and get involved, because if the Republicans take the House and Senate, we're screwed. So all there is to it. I wish it wasn't the case, but it certainly seems that way. Get involved. For somebody that's active in this, there's hearing the Trumps and hearing the Joe Manchins and hearing the Ted Cruzes and all that isn't nearly as disabling as people that are supportive of climate action, just not doing a damn thing, just sitting there on their hands. And it's not hard. You can contact these guys right here. Contact your senator. It takes 4 minutes, and they'll run you right through it. Here's the links below, and you can, in 4 minutes, you can contact your senator or congressman and ask them to be supportive of climate action. If we don't, we're done. Another action, a couple years ago, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was passed. And now it's to the point where they have a proposal out, and the link is there. There's a scoping document, and they're looking for public input. Now you can read the document and make the assessments yourself, or you can get involved with an organization that'll make the assessments and give you a line of action to press forward. But here's something that's on the books hot right now. It's in the scoping plan is open for public input right now. So there's something very much you can get involved with. I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby. I think they're a good organization. I think their hearts are in the right place. It's harder than heck trying to draw in folks that aren't really interested in being drawn in, but somebody's got to do it. And even if it just softens them up, a good thing. But there's lots of organizations out there, or one that can fit any perspective you have on the whole climate world. And I encourage you to get involved, and not just passively involved, but make the calls, do what needs to be done. If for nothing else, for the mental health of the people that are running the show. And if you're in for a little bit of entertainment, there's a movie that just came out recently, Don't Look Up. It's sad and amusing at the same time, but you should watch it. It's kind of a thought-provoking kind of a thing, so I would suggest that for anyone. And I'll leave you with this slide. We only have one planet. We only have one chance. And that is today. And if we don't act today, we're in big trouble. So get off your butts, get out there, get active in whatever way you want to be active, but get out there and be active. And that's all I have to say. I will say it's very weird to be on this end of a presentation where you have no idea at all. You can't see faces, you can't hear comments or the shuffling of feet or anything like that. So here for questions.
Thank you very much, Al, and thank you, everybody. It's 8:23, so it's a little later than we wanted.
I'm
just
sorry.
wanted to thank Al for the great presentation and for the update on the bats and for expanding it out to climate change. I'm going to we're going to start the questions now, but I just wanted to say thank you, and to thank you to Anne and the Adirondack Mountain Club as well. So the beginning is a quote, and this is from Jim. He says, "All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident." Arthur Schopenhauer. And then he said, there's a great book on carbon extraction, fees and dividends, called With Liberty and Dividends for All. And he gives a link.
Oh, that's very nice.
And Ruth says she has a new EV. Congratulations, Ruth. Plus Con Ed Smart Rewards for charging overnight. More of this, please. And she also said, could we also talk about conservation? Using less energy is also carbon neutral, and we can't seem to put energy conservation into the conversation.
So yeah, the electric vehicle thing. I have a Chevy Bolt that I bought last summer. We also have a plug-in hybrid Toyota and an earlier model hybrid Toyota. And the plug-in, my car, I would never ever consider going back to a gasoline car. It's so convenient and easy, and you come in at home at night and you plug it in, and the next day it's all ready to go, and you don't have to get your oil changed, you don't have muffler problems, you don't have any of those kind of things. No maintenance at all except for rotating the tires, and it is costing me a fraction to drive that a gasoline car would.
And Bill says, how do we convince people that solar farms do not cause net damage to the environment?
Well, you can have solar farms in situations. There's solar farms and there's solar farms. You get a 1,000 acres solar farm in a location that has or used to have any of the endangered sparrows or other species that live in the meadows. That's a problem. But certainly, if it was up to me, there would be solar panels on every house in America that's not shaded. And I know the return is less than if you have the the great big operations, but there's also zero negative. And back at our family farm in Canandaigua, there's about a 3 megawatt operation of the 10, 12 acres right next door. And some of the neighbors complained when it first went in, but it's small enough that it doesn't overwhelm the landscape. It's just one small field. It was a hay field. And it makes money for the farmer. It doesn't, it takes in the rain, gets injected back into the groundwater kind of thing, and you don't have a loss of topsoil or anything of that sort. So there's a lot of advantages, especially if you have them set so that when they've exceeded their lifetime, you can just pull them out, as opposed to being set in concrete and stuff that makes it a lot more difficult.
All right, well, we've come pretty much to the end of our questions, a whole bunch of comments. I'm just going to take one. The Good Grief Network has been a great resource for me to find others to work with to inspire action. They also have a podcast. So on that note, thank you, Al, and thank you to everybody who came, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program.
Okay, well, thank you, folks.